thank you all for coming. This presentation and screening of Junior Bonner to follow at 5 o'clock are part of Prescott College's Arizona Gives Day celebration. Arizona Gives Day is a 24-hour online giving campaign meant to encourage philanthropy within the state of Arizona. Prescott College is a nonprofit organization, and for the past couple of years, we've done what we call our Cowboy Dollar Drive on Arizona Gives Day, and it taps into a little bit of our history and pays homage to the Western setting we find ourselves in here at Prescott College. So this event's free, the popcorn's free, and it's meant to be a celebration. And there will be food available between the presentation and the film for a $5 donation, which will count towards our Arizona Gives Day fundraising campaign. So we originally had author and Prescott College alumna Malik DeBarberine scheduled to come talk about the history of location filming within the entire state of Arizona, but she did have a family emergency today. So instead, a member of the local Prescott community, Mr. Tom Slaback, has graciously stepped in and will be talking about the history of location filming, specifically within the county of Yavapai. Tom is retired from the VA for 25 years. He's lived in Prescott since 1978, and he's an expert on our film history here. So he's brought with him today several memorabilia items, and including posters and lobby cards from the original release of the film Junior Bonner. So without further ado, I will hand this over to Tom.
Thank you. Well, this is going to be kind of a tell-in show because I'm basically unprepared, so we'll be speaking off the cuff. And I'm going to try to do it chronologically, so hopefully that helps my mind. I'll forewarn you, I have a problem with any type of proper names, and I'm good at forgetting them. In a previous talk, I couldn't come up with the name of the city, Philadelphia. So I'm going to get that out of the way right now. When I'm talking about the Lubin Film Studio that opened here in 1912, they were headquartered in Bellevue, Pennsylvania, which was a suburb of Philadelphia. So a little background on how I got into being a film historian, specifically on Yavapai County. Back in 1990, it was discovered that by categorical exclusion, meaning it was done in secret, the Forest Service had negotiated with Yavapai County 6 easements crossing Oak Creek. And the one the county chose to build a 4-lane highway, suspension bridge over a ½ mile in length, was going to bury our iconic Red Rock crossing under concrete. That's the single most photographed location in the state. It has appeared in 20 movies, numerous TV shows, and commercials. So I had started vacationing in Yavapai County in the 50s with my parents. And I remembered one time we had camped at Red Rock Crossing, used to be a Forest Service campground, and there were only 2 buildings in Sedona. The major place was the Ted DeGrazia studio and Raleigh's camera shop. Well, while visiting Raleigh's, we bought some of the latest month's Arizona highways. That was in '59. And I remembered in 1990, one magazine specifically, which had the lead article by Bob Bradshaw, who at the time in the 50s, early 60s, was the premier photographer for Arizona highways. And the title of his article was, "They Still Go This Away and That Away in the Red Rock Country." It was the story of all the movies that he had either been in or worked on since he moved to Sedona in 1945. And I do have a copy of the magazine on the round table there, open to that article. Unfortunately, in my research to find all the movies made at Red Rock Crossing, since he published that in '59, I discovered a lot of errors in his article. So you can't put too much into the titles of the movies. And again, it's only 45. He has nothing of the silence starting in 23 and the B movies made in the 30s. So I figured I'm going to find every movie made at Red Rock Crossing and tell the county how many millions of dollars they will be losing if they pave over the site and movies can no longer be made there. And from doing that research, I started finding movies, especially made in Prescott, and then every other community in the county. And basically, I found over 300 movies made in Yavapai County or filmed in Yavapai County since 1912. Approximately half are made in Prescott, half in Sedona, and then the smattering everywhere imaginable in the county. So I'll kind of get started and try to do chronological. The Lubin Film Company opened a satellite studio in 1912 in Prescott. And it was kind of interesting why, because at that time, Thomas Edison thought he controlled picture making and picture showing with his patents. And he hired thugs to go in and basically destroy all the other movie company equipment, beat up the personnel. These other companies, to get away from Edison, headquartered in New Jersey. Up until that time, the movie capital was New Jersey and New York City. And they moved as far away as they could. And the early West Coast film studios were in Los Angeles, Santa Monica, Santa Barbara, and Niles. However, Lubin and the second studio, Selig, that opened here, distributed through the General Film Trust and was controlled by Edison. So they did not come here to get away from Edison. They came here specifically for the scenery and because we still have working ranches. And it would be real easy as far as getting stock and real cowboys to appear in the movies. Lubin made 15 movies in 1912 under the direction of Romaine Fielding. Unfortunately, they are all lost movies. I have been able to determine with 100% accuracy titles for 12 of those movies. 2 of them I'm around 80% sure of, and the last one I'm still looking for. He was a very avant-garde filmmaker for the time period, and you have to remember at this time movies were basically in 35 millimeter, one reel in length. And that's equivalent to about 10 minutes. So he made movies on such topics as a forest ranger on the Prescott National Forest, the miners' strike in Jerome, the Mexican Revolution, and it wasn't your standard shoot-'em-up Western. It's very difficult to find anything pertaining to advertising or photos from those movies. I've got about half a dozen photos, none specifically from a movie, but of the various members of the cast. They use stock companies, so every movie that he made here, he starred in. He wrote most of them, produced most of them, and he had 2 contract players that are in all of them. A secondary male star, Robin Adair, and the leading lady was Mary Ryan. I wish I could tell you more about the Lubin Film Company, but there isn't much information out there. However, Lubin was awarded an honorary Academy Award in 1947 for establishing the commercial film industry in the United States. Edison, to get back to him a little bit, if you've ever watched the program Connections that was on PBS, it takes to any great invention all types of previous little ones, that it all comes together when everything is available. And movies were created in just about every country on the face of the earth at the same time. So it wasn't just Edison in France, it was the Lumiere brothers, Fitz Greene in England, Russia. Everybody at the same time started making movies. After Lubin left after 1 year, and I should say, by the way, the studio, you're almost sitting in it. It was behind Mercy Hospital. And what Lubin did, he rented a house, and he used that for offices, wardrobe, props. And then they built an outdoor platform, a stage basically, that had movable canvas walls. And they would paint the interior on the walls of houses or bars, or saloons, whatever it was, and they could move these so that they were always well lit because they didn't have artificial lighting yet. So after he moved on, he went to Tucson for about 6 months, and then to Colorado for about the same time. William Selleck, another early inventor of motion picture cameras, sent William Duncan to Prescott, and he took over what had been the Lubin studio. And that was in 1913. He again was the writer, producer, director, and he hired basically an unknown at that time to play Indians, Mexicans, and villains, and that was Tom Mix. William Duncan starred in almost all of his movies, with a couple of exceptions, with Tom Mix actually being the star. One of those from 1913 still exists. I have a copy, The Law and the Outlaw. William Duncan was the law, Tom Mix the outlaw, but he was the star. And this was a three-reel movie, a half an hour, which for that time period was a long movie. It was extensively shot in the Granite Dells. And I do occasionally show it. Leading lady of just about all of these William Duncan 1913 movies was Myrtle Stedman. They thought Mix had promise, and they sent him in 1914 to the Los Angeles studio. Selleck had 2 studios in Los Angeles. One was called the Zoo at Eden Park, and that's now where Echo Park is located. They called it the Zoo because they had all of the wild animals there for making movies with. Elephants, tigers, lions, you name it, they had it there. Well, they studied under Colin Campbell, who was the premier director of feature-length movies for Selleck. And Tom Mix got training there in how to direct movies. He actually wrote a few, and he starred in a few, but they were all made around Los Angeles, and the surviving ones you can tell because most have palm trees or eucalyptus trees in the background. The early Selleck movies are very difficult to come by. I have maybe a dozen of them. And the real way that you can tell a movie is made in Prescott, you have to see the movie and find identifiable locations. Mix was successful there. He came back and headed the Selleck unit in Prescott in 1950. And I need to backtrack a little bit. I forgot a little thing to mention. When Mix came here with his third wife, Olive Stokes Mix, and their baby daughter, Ruth, and Ruth Mix became a B movie Western star in the 30s. There's a lot of rumor going around that Tom Mix lived here on his own ranch, and Yavapai Hills is what they say. That's a fabrication done in the 60s by the subdividers of Yavapai Ranch. He did film there, and actually in some of the early movies, you'll notice the stable barn that has a very distinctive side in it. And they now claim that part of the clubhouse was that barn. I haven't been able to prove that, but in some of the old movies, you can see this building that was on the Yavapai Ranch. In 1958, his third wife, he was married at least 5 times, wrote an autobiography called The Fabulous Tom Mix. And she devotes him there a few paragraphs to the fact that William Selig rented a house in downtown Prescott for them, and she was so happy because since 1910, she'd been living out of a suitcase in hotels around the country where Mix was making movies, beginning in Oklahoma in 1910. He was on film a year before William S. Hart. Most people think William S. Hart was the first cowboy. He was not. And I need to actually even go back further in our movie history here, because it predates making movies in Prescott. The very first movies ever shown commercially in Arizona were shown in Prescott in 1898 by Professor White and his traveling motion picture show. This was his first showing and last showing in the state, as his next play date was to be Winslow. And at that time, the way you got around was by train. And on the trip from Prescott to Winslow, he fell off the train, was run over, and killed. Now, we do have a film historian that now lives in Jerome that has copies of those original movies and also has an original Edison motion picture projector. And he has shown occasionally at the Fippen Museum. And at that time, they hadn't invented the film reel yet. Film was held on spools on a rack that was threaded like this. And they would basically project into a mesh wastebasket. And then had to hand put the film back on the rack to be able to show it again. And the place that this was shown was in the basement of the head hotel. And the last time I was there, the temporary peg was still on the wall that held the screen. Anyway, getting back to 1915 and Tom Mix, he turned out between 1915 and 1925, 65 movies so far that I've cataloged. Probably there are more. And the reason was he was guaranteed a profit through the General Film Trust. And he was paid $500 per picture. And what was left over after he paid the other actors, and the big part was for stabling the animals, he got to keep anything as profit. So he was turning out 1 to 2 movies a week in 1950. Selig, during World War I, lost their film distributorship in Europe because of World War I, and went bankrupt and closed down in 1970. And this is sort of the same today. The majority of Hollywood movie profit doesn't come from the US, but it comes from worldwide leasing. With the closing of Selig, Mix started appearing every day at the office of William Fox, of what became 20th Century Fox. And he eventually got hired. And in 1918, he came back to Prescott and started making his big budget movies with a film. Now I'm going to not get the title. Treat 'Em Rough. And it was filmed in Prescott, on the railroad, especially towards Ramsgate as you head towards Skull Valley. And then he started making 1 or 2 movies a year until 1928 here. And though they're considered short today, most of them are in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 reels, or about an hour in length. He was a showman, and they spent big dollars on putting together unbelievable stunts. One of the authors for mixed screenplays was Adela Rogers St. John's. She got her start as a newspaper woman for the Los Angeles Examiner at the 1915 trial of the century of Gabrielle Darley. She was the most infamous Madame of Prescott. And in early movies, among people like Hoot Gibson, Charles Gephardt, who later became better known as Buck Jones, also Wallace Reed appeared in bit parts in mixed movies. By the late teens, he was the biggest matinee idol in Hollywood. And like many celebrities, Elvis, Michael Jackson, he wound up, because of his doctor, becoming addicted to morphine. He broke his back while filming in the Sierra Nevada. And 2 years later, because of his drug addiction, he had a massive heart attack and died. His wife was a movie actress, Dorothy Davenport, and she decided to take his fortune and make movies of social value. Her first movie was about drug addiction. Her second movie was about prostitution. It was called The Red Kimono. Gabrielle was still doing her trade in Prescott and saw the movie at the Elks. And it's a completely whitewashed version. She's a heroine in the movie. She's always taken advantage of, but always makes a comeback and is redeemed in the end of the movie. Well, she was a murderess, and the trial of the century was the first known murder that she committed. And it was in New Orleans. It may have been her first husband. She killed 4 more husbands. But she saw this movie here, and unfortunately, they used her real name in the movie. She sued, and she took everything: the Hollywood mansion, $150,000 in cash, Dorothy's diamond jewelry, and she started wearing the jewelry here on the street. She was just covered in diamonds. Well, eventually, she did, when the reformers came into government here and started cracking down on gambling, prostitution, and drinking, she was kicked out of Prescott and took up residence in Salome, where she danced. And she married the owner of the smaller of the 2 Portico gas stations that are still there. If you look out behind it, you'll see the cribs are still there. And she again used her famous modus operandi of using rat poison to kill that husband, her 5th husband. But anyway, Adelaide Rogers St. John's went on from there to write screenplays for Tom Mix. And just about everyone imaginable got their start working in Yavapai County that became Hollywood legends. Of course, Hollywood didn't exist when we had our first movie studio here. Big movies were made by people that got their start here. Victor Fleming, the director, you may recognize him. He did The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind. Well, in 1923, he filmed the Zane Grey novel, Call of the Canyon, at the confluence of the West Fork and Oak Creek. And they almost perished there. Film companies like to work in the winter because then they wouldn't have so many spectators getting in the way. And there was a snowstorm there that trapped them on the wrong side of Oak Creek. And they just about ran out of provisions. That's also a lost movie, starred Richard Dix and Willis Wilson. The very first blockbuster movie, Cecil B. DeMille epic from 1913, was going to be filmed originally in Flagstaff. They got caught in a snowstorm. He took the train through Prescott, still a snowstorm, so he wound up taking everything. In that time, there were no studios in Hollywood that he could work at. So he had everything brought in by train. And he shot the movie there, The Squaw Man, which has been filmed at least 3 times since then. Basically, we look at the teens and the 20s as Prescott's heyday. In the 30s, it became Sedona. Fox went there and filmed a lot of George O'Brien movies. In the 40s, the early 40s, it all came back to Prescott. It's because in 1939, a larger studio was built here by Producers Picture Corporation. And if you know where the big grassy field at Watson Lake Park is, they built a whole town set, Western Town Street. The road that used to go to the original boat dock there was the main street of town. They had 2 sound stages. They had their own electrical generating equipment. In 1939, and we'll start chronologically, their first movie, they began shooting The Sagebrush Family Trails West. Unfortunately, it had basically no stars in it. The only really well-known actor was a character actor. The guy that in over 100 movies was the fast-talking Carney guy, the Barker, and they misspelled his name on the movie poster. Mid-production, they had to shut down because they didn't realize how cold it gets here in the winter. When I moved here, which was in '78, the winters were routinely 10 below when I would bicycle into work at the VA. And it was probably that cold or colder, even earlier time period. So their generator equipment froze up and was putting all types of noise in the line. So they had to have new generators made in Chicago and shipped out here to finish that movie. They only made 1 other of their own productions. That was a Tim McCoy movie, Texas Renegades, and it's a good movie, primarily shot in the Dells. After that, they started leasing the film studio to other companies, primarily Monogram. And the Tim McCoy, Buck Jones movies, the Tex Ritter, he made 5 here while dating Dorothy Faye Southworth, who was an actress in her own right, known as Dorothy Faye on the screen. Primarily B-Westerns, but she would occasionally appear in big movies like The Philadelphia Story with Cary Grant. And she married Tex Ritter here in June of '41, and everybody that had anything to do with filmmaking was here in Prescott. And there were multi full-page stories, of course, in the newspaper, a lot of photographs, because all the big stars were here for that wedding. After she married him, she retired from the business. They had 2 sons, Tom, and probably you know the other son better, John Ritter, the comedian. Trying to get back to my thoughts here. Also, Tom Keene shot a series of movies here. In the 30s and 40s, the B-Westerns were mostly series Westerns, meaning the same star would make 6 to 8 movies a year for the same studio, and they would release them at about 1 to 2 month intervals during the year. Tex Ritter made a very good movie, his first one made in Prescott, which was Rainbow Over the Range, co-starring Dorothy Faye. It has a lot of the Dells in it, Watson Lake, and the old schoolhouse that was located out near where the Wilkerson Ranch now is. After Arizona Bound, which was the lead series movie of the Rough Riders, and there were 7 movies in that series, until Buck Jones died in the Coconut Grove fire. The city fathers thought, gee, Producers Picture Corporation, they aren't making movies, they're leasing the studio. If the city of Prescott owned the studio, we could lease it out and make money for the studio. So in late 1941, the city bought the studio. Unfortunately, the next thing that happened was December 7th, Pearl Harbor. And that killed the studio system era in Prescott. During the war, they bulldozed the studio. And I do have some pictures taken just before they bulldozed it, somewhere out here on the tables. Basically, no movies were made here till the end of the war, with one exception, and that was Leave Her to Heaven in 1945. That movie was nominated for several Academy Awards, including Best Actress, Gene Tierney. This is a film noir. It won the Academy Award for Best Color Cinematography. And this is the most saturated, brilliant Technicolor you'll ever see in your life. It's available on DVD. I heartily recommend, if you haven't seen it, to go rent it or buy a copy. I think they go for about $7 now because it's been out for about 6 or 7 years on DVD. Had a great cast: Cornell Wilde, Vincent Price. It was shot at Bass Lake in California, and in Sedona, at what's now the village of Oak Creek, and at the Granite Hills Resort swimming pool. And that pool is supposedly the mansion, the backyard of a New Mexico mansion. And the village of Oak Creek scenes, when you have the nuns in the background, is part of the backyard. And there's also the scattering of Gene Tierney's father's ashes, and that takes place up on the merry-go-round on Schnebel Hill. We have a series of movies then made after World War II, when all the materials become available again to shoot Technicolor. And so they rushed to Sedona. So the 40s and early 50s, a large number of movies were filmed in Sedona. Sedona never had movie studios except for one small garage movie studio. And the majority were filmed in Technicolor to take advantage of the red rocks. So we have sort of an exception. The next movie I have there is The Angel and the Bad Man, which was filmed in black and white. Wayne shot 2 movies in Sedona. The earlier one, shot during the war, was filmed in '44. And it's all Sedona, but none of the cast were actually in Sedona. All of their scenes were studio scenes shot with rear projection. So they used doubles for the long shots of all the actors in Sedona. And that became popular as a way to save money up through the early 50s. The next movie I have is Gene Autry's first color movie, shot in Cinecolor, and it is a very good movie. It's a remake of the 1934 Ken Maynard movie, The Strawberry Roan. And I was very fortunate to meet his co-star, Gloria Henry, when we showed the movie in Sedona. And so I got here to autograph a whole lot of lobby cards, black and white photos. The next movie poster is Santa Fe. That was filmed in downtown Prescott, especially at the depot. At Drake, if you want to see what Drake looked like in 1951, rent the movie. It's available now on DVD. And it was also filmed at Perkinsville. The climatic gun battle takes place at the depot there. And they This supposedly was the story of the war between the Denver Rio Grande Western and the Santa Fe Railroad for trackage rights through the Royal Gorge of Colorado. The very River Canyon is used as the Royal Gorge. And they used the last remaining steam locomotive in Prescott, Bradshaw Mountain, number 52. That was a 280 consolidation. It started at least as early as 1920 in the movies here, and appears in the Tom Mix movie, The Texan, and they shot it on the P&E on the backside of what's now Prescott Valley, and have a holdup of the train, and Tom Mix lassos the engineer out of the cab of the locomotive. One of his many stunts, of course, mounted on Tony. Tony, next to Mix, who was the highest paid actor this year, got the second most fan mail in the country. See, there was something else I was going to mention. Oh, the concluding scene in Santa Fe, they shot at the depot, and they have Bradshaw Mountain 52 there, which was painted on one side as the Santa Fe Railroad, and on the other side is the Denver Rio Grande Western. Another way to save money. The very end of the film takes place at the depot, and basically the whole population of Prescott is in that scene. They have a lot of square dancers there, big celebration going on. And if you look closely, you'll see a little boy and a little girl kind of wander through the scene, not in costume. Next, we have the biggest Western, not necessarily the best, ever filmed in Cinerama. Out of the West was one. It had basically every star that wasn't tied down at the time. They brought in from MGM the Reno, the oldest operating steam locomotive in the United States, built in 1875 for the Virginia and Truckee Railroad that ran from Carson City to Virginia City. They actually have a short segment now running again there. Unfortunately, that locomotive, when MGM sold their props department and back lot, was bought by Robert Shelton. He was the current owner of Old Tucson. That was built in 1939 for the movie Arizona, starring Gene Arthur and William Holden. Well, in '95, the studio burned, and it took the locomotive with it. And they have a cosmetic restoration of it, but it can no longer run. But they trucked that in from MGM, put it on the rails there at the depot, and under its own power, it steamed to Perkinsville. And the scenes in the movie, and it was shot all over the United States, this movie. The scenes at Perkinsville, the Prescott family is getting off the train there at Gold City. And MGM doubled the size of the depot, and it finally has collapsed what they added on the west end. Kind of a mess still the last time I was there. And the family gets off the train. So we have Carolyn Jones, George Papard, Debbie Reynolds, and a very young Stanley Livingston. You may remember him as the younger brother to Barry Livingston on My Three Sons, Fred McMurray on TV. I got a chance to talk to him with his experiences, and he said that there were three directors, by the way, of that movie. John Ford included, but the scenes shot here were Henry Hathaway. He said he was an absolute tyrant on the set, and to make up for it, he took him into town here and told him he could buy anything he wanted, and Hathaway would pay for it. What he bought was a mineral collection. And he says he has more rocks than Prescott now has. That movie was released 4 times over the years, finally being released in widescreen rather than Cinerama in stereophonic sound in the 70s. That was popular before there was video. Most movies would be re-released around 5 to 10 years after their initial showing because people had no other way to see it. And so if you hadn't seen it, to you it was a new movie. As we got into the late 40s, early 50s, secondary releasing companies started buying the rights. And you would see movies, for instance, Pride of the Bowery, which was from 1941, filmed here downtown primarily, re-released rather than by Monogram, by another company like Savoy or Principal Pictures, teeny tiny companies that were basically Gower Gulch. That's in Hollywood where the grade C studios used to live, in the shadow of RKO and Paramount and the other big boys. Continuing on, I mean, everybody made movies in Yavapai County. Elvis made a movie here. I think it's the worst movie he ever made, except for the introduction. Under the titles, it's an area tour of the Red Rock country with Elvis singing How Beautiful It Is. And from there, the movie rapidly goes downhill. Then, of course, we have the iconic Billy Jack, which I find to be a horrible movie. It's the old double speak that I'm a man of peace, and then he literally beats the stuff inside of everybody he comes in contact with. And if you were here, I guess it's been 10 years or so ago, when he was in his 70s, he came back trying to raise money for a 5th Billy Jack movie. And I actually, from his children, started getting emails asking to make contributions so he could make another movie, but it didn't last long enough to be an 80-year-old Billy Jack beating everybody up. All types of movies have been made here. Of course, primarily Westerns, comedies, science fiction, horror movies, romances. So our next one is a horror movie, Creepshow. It was filmed, there was actually 3 separate stories put together from DC Comics. One section of it was filmed at Granite Basin Lake with a nebulous monster devouring teenage partiers on the beach there. The other one was shot in what's now Dewey Humboldt, about a wooden Indian that comes alive to avenge the murder of 2 shopkeepers, played by George Kennedy and the Sarong Girl from the 40s, the Bob Hope Road movies, Dorothy Lamour. Basically, the kids that were the actors here were unknowns and still are. Then in our science fiction, we have, which was a wonderful Isaac Asimov novel, made into a movie shot down at Arcosate to be the future. And unfortunately, it is a horrible, almost incomprehensible movie. If you read the book here and there, you can see what they're trying to tell you. It's pretty horrible. We're going to skip one movie that's out of order here in this. Then we have a movie not too long ago, The Cactus Kid. And surprisingly, there's a movie poster for it. Don Ashley has come back a couple of times and shown it here at the Elks, along with Billy Jack, who was the director. But it was never released. The only showing I know of, and it was only once, was shown on the Hallmark channel. It's a family movie. It's a little boy basically dying of cancer, and he has to make a wish, and he wants to rob a bank. And so that's what bank downtown is, right? The Bank of Arizona. And it's supporting minor casting, a whole lot of locals are in it. So if you were here when the movie was made, you'll recognize a lot of people in it, including our own resident stuntman that's now passed away, that got his start with Mix in 1932, Mike Dawson. And if you've seen any Western or where a woman is doing daredevil stunts on a horse, it's him. For instance, Stagecoach, the classic one, the great one, John Ford with John Wayne. During the Indian attack, you'll see multiple flying W's. That's where they attach a steel cable to the rear legs of a horse. They run it at full gallop until the cable plays out and the horse somersaults head first. Usually he's killed. That's now against the law to do, but that was common practice up into the 50s. But there are two Indians that you constantly see. One is Yakima Canuck, the famous stuntman. The shorter, wiry Indian is Mike Dawson. And they perform multiple side-by-side flying W's throughout that sequence. Mike was an expert horseman. He raised horses. One of his favorites was Tar Baby. And it appeared in several movies. Probably the most famous before he sold the horse, The Stallion Road with Ronald Reagan and Alexis Smith. And right now I can't think of the other well-known actor in it. But he doubled Alexis Smith in all the jump scenes riding Tar Baby. Ronald Reagan was taken with Tar Baby and made Mike, as Mike said, an offer he couldn't refuse, and bought the horse. And it showed up then in a movie from 1951, starring Ronald Reagan and Robert Fleming, shot at Old Tucson. Can't quite pull out the title. I can look it up for you. It has to do with soldiers in an army post with Ronald Reagan. Then we've got Transamerica, another movie that was nominated Best Actress and also for Best Song and Best Score by Dolly Parton in 2005. Again, I find it to be a horrible movie. It's a road trip movie. A man that is transgendering become a woman finds out that he has a son in jail in New York City and goes to get him out of jail, and they begin a cross-country trip, supposedly to California. The scenes that are supposed to be the Midwest breadbasket are shot on Perkinsville Road in Chino Valley. It has scenes shot at Watson Lake. What became the Kitty Litter Mine near Skull Valley. And the reason why is Tucker, the director, went to Yavapai College. So that kind of takes us more or less up to date. After the film studio period ended here, basically with World War II, they continued to make movies, still do in the area, quite often in Prescott. And they bring in the whole studios now on 18-wheelers. So when you see them parked around the plaza, you know they're making a movie somewhere close by. And they've made a lot of horrible movies in the last 20 years.
We've got about 10 more minutes. Do you want to talk about Junior Bonner at all?
A little bit here. I've shown it several times at the Elks, and I was very fortunate to have the author of the book there at the Elks. And then a couple of years later, during the Western Symposium that's held at various places throughout the West, it was held in Prescott, up at the, what was the Sheraton there? I'm trying to think what they call it now, the Prescott Resort. And again, this time we had his son there, Elizabeth Ruffner, and myself to talk a little bit about how they shot the movie, some of the favorite scenes there. And it's a movie that, except for some rodeo scenes, it's really not a rodeo movie, it's about family. And great actors in it. Robert Preston plays his father, Ida Lapina, his mother, Joe Don Baker, his brother. And it's basically the strife of day-to-day family life. Exceedingly well done. Probably my favorite scene in the movie was filmed during Frontier days in 79, released in 72. Directed by Sam Peckinpah, and he was already becoming, shall we say, a little unbalanced at this time. And I do have some great black and whites of the Mona Plaza goofing around. So he has the script girl as his footstool. He has another staff member fanning him. But he basically eventually he became nuts and rather violent towards the end. But my favorite scene really was very underplayed at the depot, and Junior Bonner and Robert Preston were having a conversation about what was going to happen to Robert Preston. He wants to leave his wife and go prospect for gold in Australia. And she's been upset with him their whole married life because he's a dreamer. And Junior Bonner, he's pretty much a washed-up rodeo cowboy, basically discussing life choices. Cowboy hat with one of the Preston boys off across the tracks. This is just one little scene. And Junior Bonner watches him walk out in front of the train, and he thinks his father's committed suicide. But there are just moments like that throughout the whole film. There's a lot of comedy in the movie also. Highly recommend that you stay and watch it. Again, these are all original. Everyone has seen these. They're common. This is a more rare one-sheet movie poster. I should kind of explain about the history of movie advertising, because it started before there were movies. It started in the 1890s when they standardized the sizes of stage play movie posters. They standardized on what's called a one sheet, which is this size, which is 27 by 41 inches. A half sheet, which is 22 by 28, and an insert, which is 14 by 36. And then they have, and I have a lot of them displayed in the back, they're called lobby cards, which are 11 by 14. And those, until late 80s, were the standard sizes. In the 80s and early 90s, they started changing the size of the one sheet to 27, 27 by 40. They cut 1 inch off. And the half sheet and the insert, as long as are the lobby cards, are printed on a very hard surface, thick paper stock. It's almost cardboard. So these two are also considered lobby cards. The movie posters, I didn't bring the big ones. The one sheet's the small one, the movie poster, they're printed on paper. And from this, they go to what's called a 3 sheet, and basically it's 3 of these printed this way, and they're usually printed 2/3 and 1/3. And when they're sent to the movie theater, by the way, these until recently were all sent folded to save on money on shipping. So the 3 sheets came in 2 pieces, and it was the responsibility of the theater manager to match them up and put them together. Then there's what's called a 6 sheet, and that's 81 by 81 inches. And my most prized poster is a 6 sheet from a movie filmed here in 1919, Tom Mix, Wilderness Trail. And in the background on the poster is Colleen Moore, who in the 20s became the highest paid movie actress in the world. And she became a collector of small houses, and the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry, they have the most fabulous small houses. So we got home with this movie. There's actually a big size Tom Mix, a big size Princess is a villain, and then in the background, Colleen Moore. She made 2 movies, 1919 and 1920 here, with Mix before she became well known. And Mix had a lot of people who became big stars that started out as co-stars. Probably one of the bigger ones was Clara Bow. And of course, Buck Jones, Coot Gibson.
I ask a question?
Yes,
Do any of the movies show Granite Mountain?
they do from Williamson Valley. That was a favorite filming location of Tom Mix at the American Ranch. And I do have some views there, both the Mix at the American Ranch, and later in the 40s, Tex Ritter loved filming there also. Unfortunately, when they subdivided it as the American Ranch there, they decided they couldn't save the buildings and they bulldozed it out. Any other questions?
What's the name of that horrible movie that they filmed at Camp Verde?
Actually, I like it. I think it's an excellent movie with William Shatner, Kingdom of the Spiders. Tarantulas go on the warpath to destroy Camp Verde and every living thing, including the cats.
Do you know a film called Bless the Beast and the Children?
Yes, that also was nominated for an Academy Award for the song done by the Carpenters that later became famous again as Nadia's theme.
Huh. So that was, at least some of that was filmed in there, correct?
All downtown, also in Jerome, in the road to Jerome, and in Williamson Valley.
One more question?
Which one of your favorite movies filmed in Yavapai?
Well, there are a lot of them, actually. So, Junior Bonner, I love. Leave Her to Heaven is a great movie. I love Santa Fe because I'm into trains. So, whenever there's a train movie, I usually like it.
Well, we'll wrap it up. There's going to be several minutes between, this end of this and when we start the movie. So if you have any more specific questions for Tom or want to
Walk around.
his collection here, please do so. Thank you so much for coming. And probably just a little after 5, we're going to start the movie. And if you're hungry, we have a barbecue sandwich dinner available in the cafe for a $5 donation. So I'd love to see you all stick around for the movie. Thank you.